Welcome back, everybody. We are going to begin part 3 of this 3, maybe 4-part series, and we're going to get these guys loaded into the kiln, fired, and finally see what they will look like when they're ready to take home. So if that's something that you want to see, stick around and find out how we do it. Before we jump into loading the kiln, let me take you on a quick kiln room tour and discuss how we stage pieces that are ready to be fired. Enjoy! Here are our shelves where students put their pieces when they are done and ready to be fired to become bisqued or glazed. So we have shelf 1, shelf 2, and then shelf 3 inside the kiln room. The way these shelves work, I have these kiln posts here labeled in inches, and the students, they bring their finished piece, they put it right in front of the posts, and they figure out where their piece falls in terms of height. So they put their piece in, and because this piece is slightly shorter than the 3-inch, but a lot shorter than the 4 would be the more appropriate shelf to put it on. So they take their piece, find where the 4-inch pieces are located, and then they would put it here to then be moved into the kiln. So the way I have it set up for this round, I have 3-inch pieces here, 4-inch pieces here. I have a bunch of pieces drying slowly there. And then on this side, I have a lot of 3-inch pieces, since a lot of the students are learning how to use the pottery wheel, so bowls and short cups are very popular. Once these pieces fill up the shelves and become dry enough, I stage them into the kiln room, which I then do the same thing. I label the height, and then I put them according to the height so that when I load them into the kiln, I can just grab and go. Now, the reason why I don't have these permanent is because some projects tend to be shorter than others, some tend to be higher. So I want to be able to change it on a whim to make it match the current and most popular size students have made. And our kilns that we have a small scut with the digital touch input, and then we have 2 larger paragons that are the workhorses of our ceramic studio. Here are parts of our kiln furniture. So we have our posts, we have 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch, 6 inch, and then old miscellaneous ones. Below that, we have our cookies that we use to fire our glaze pieces on to prevent meltdowns. We have some stilts, and then we have broken kiln cookies and a scraper to remove any glaze on our shelves. Below that, we have the shelves for our small kiln. We have some kiln fiber in case we need to use it to prevent something from getting too hot. And then next to the kilns, we have the larger shelves next to each kiln. We also have our vent switch that is Wi-Fi. So we can turn it on, and I can set a timer to turn it off when the firing is done. So here's the 25-minute time lapse sped up to 1 minute and 23 seconds of loading the kiln for a glaze firing. As I'm putting each piece inside the kiln, I put a cookie underneath it, and you can see that yellow sponge on the top right corner of the video being moved, and I'm wiping the bottoms as I'm loading. And as I'm loading the pieces, you can see me shifting and taking pieces out, putting it back in to maximize the spacing. And loading the kiln is very similar to a puzzle. You're trying to fit every piece that you can in the space that's provided, and shifting and moving the pieces are always something that is needed. And sometimes you just can't get everything to fit, and so you move on and start stacking the next level. And it's always so rewarding once you're able to load everything that you have in front of you, but it's also a little frustrating when you just can't get that last piece to fit. Now, on this final area that I'm loading, you can see me setting some bricks down and having this broken shelf in and out, and so that's me setting up the spacing for it. And that broken shelf is just a half shelf that I use whenever I have tall pieces and short pieces, and not enough to fill one complete level of each.
If you guys want a more detailed video on how to load the kiln, unload the kiln, and fire it, let me know in the comments below. And that's something I could make in one of the upcoming videos.
So we are finally ready to load the teacups that we made. And now it's not the tightest kiln pack that I've ever done, but this is the end of the semester. So this is the last kiln firing that we're going to be doing. And we just luckily don't have too much where we need to do another firing, but that one's going to fit nicely. And you can put it on a cookie if you want, but I know this glaze and I know that it's not going to run off. So I'm just going to put it directly on the kiln shelf. And I'm going to get the other 2 cups. Now, these two, this one, just to be safe, this glaze is almost at the bottom of the foot. So I'm going to go ahead and put a cookie under this one, just to be safe. And what you can do to make sure it's extra wiped is get a sponge and then just gently wipe the bottom, just to be safe. And I've been doing this off camera with all the student pieces that look like they're a little too low. And we'll get a cookie that looks like it fits nicely. And we'll get this one down. Shift this one over. And this next piece, same thing. The glaze is really low to the bottom, so I'm going to find a cookie that fits nicely. There we go. Put this one down. And the last piece I can go ahead and put in. And because this is such a loose kiln pack, I'm going to throw in another piece that was already glaze fired, just so that this can help retain the heat a little better. And so whenever I have pieces that can fit and to help retain the heat, because if you do a loose kiln pack, it's going to cool faster, I just have random pieces that I can put into the kiln when needed. And the last thing is I need to put another student piece, and then this little thing here was a straw that broke off of this ice cream cone. And so I'm just going to go ahead and set up a stilt for it and lay it across so that it can fire without getting stuck. There we go. All right, changing angles. You can see that this one's already glaze fired. I'm refiring because there was a little flaw in it. So let's get this closed, programmed, and fired. All right, here are the pieces out of the kiln. We fired it for about 16 hours to reach cone 5, which is around 2,156 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how fast you fire. It fired, like I said, for 15 hours, and we had to let it cool for another 48 before we pull the pieces out. And here are the final results. We have the piece that we dipped fully in white and the top half in floating blue. We have the second piece where we poured the glaze in, poured it out, and dipped the bottom half. And then we have the last one where we poured the glaze in, poured it out, dipped the bottom half, and then we realized we messed up and we had to dip the top to cover. And so looking at these, which one do you guys prefer? Piece 1, piece 2, or piece 3? Let me know in the comments below which one you like. And so let's take a closer look at them. Here's piece number 1, where the floating blue overlapped the white. Not too much depth, just a kind of somewhat interesting blue, but not the most interesting. Definitely not my favorite out of these two. And then we have the style that I prefer. And the reasoning is because where the two glazes overlap here, this is floating blue over white, it creates a little more of a lead-in, a blend into the true floating blue here. And I do like that kind of darker blue with some light white coming through, and then finally the rich dark blue that has more interesting variation going on. And then we have this one, which has the most interesting movements. We have true floating blue here, we have a double dip of floating blue here, and then we have the gloss white covered in floating blue here. So we have 3 different variations of color, and I think they blend really well with one another. So which one do you guys like the best?
If you're enjoying these videos, please don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps to grow this little channel and you can see the videos being released every week.
All right, so to talk about these a little bit, floating blue is considered a breaking glaze. Breaking glazes are where glazes turn one color when they're thin and another color when they're thick. So floating blue, where it's thin, it turns more brown, and you can see it on the edges here on the ridges. It's a little more brown. Actually, this one is a better example. You can see it's a little more brown. Where it's thicker, it turns more of this true floating blue color. And it's also a phase separation glaze where it has more depth to it. There's layers of different glass that creates more variety within it. So looking at it, you can see different wisps of various colors. Blues, some greens, some whites, some browns, really cool depth. And floating blues are very common in the ceramic world. And they're one of my favorite glazes to use because even though you use them and you dip them, every time you get results coming out, they all will always look slightly different from one another. And here's the point of view cam so you can see, and I'm still working on trying to get the colors in the camera on my head to look the same as the camera in front of me. So please bear with me while I play with the settings. Which camera angle do you guys like? Oh, and then in the comments, people talked about the pinholes that start developing in the glazes after you dip. There was only one little pinhole that actually stayed. The rest melted and healed over. And I didn't do any buffing with my fingers. It more or less kind of healed. So to fix that, I would just add a little more of this glaze and then refire. And hopefully that will melt and heal over. Or I can just fire it and have a hold at the end of the kiln firing. Right, and like I said, this is my favorite. And you can see this is the double dip of floating blue. And then here's the normal floating blue. Really cool cup. And it was a little on the thicker side. You can see it started running past the actual foot. Enough about talking about glazes. Let's get these sanded so we can get these home and start using them. So in order to get these bottoms perfectly smooth, you're going to need to sand it. And the safest way to sand is to wet sand. So that means to have water on it as you sand so that the dust that is being created gets trapped in the water rather than being released in the air, because the dust that comes off of this is really bad for you to breathe in. So if you have to dry sand it, I highly recommend you do it outside or in a well-ventilated, purified area. You wear an N95 mask over your face, and you just make sure that no one else is really around you. So that's why I prefer wet sanding, because wet sanding is so much safer. And whenever I sand my pieces, I use the Giffin Grip. And I actually thought this was called the Giffin Grip. It's called the Giffin Grip. And I use this to sand, and I'll show you the process in a second. But for those who don't have access to a Giffin Grip, if you are sanding, like I said, I recommend wet sanding. And so you're gonna need a few things. First off, I have my little sanding station here, and you want to get a sanding block, preferably something that has some diamond sanding bits into it. And then I have two other flexible sanding pads, which I'll talk about in a second. And one thing to talk about before we actually sand these is I don't like reaching over whenever I don't have to, because that's not the best for your back. It's not the most ergonomic for your body. So I try to always set up a station to my left or to my right. There's nothing here right now, but that way I don't need to bend over. I can just go like that in order to grab my things. When I usually throw production, I have a container of water right here, so I can just reach and then add water, so I'm not constantly bending. But anyway, wet sanding. So if you are wet sanding and you don't have access to a Giffin Grip, the way that I recommend doing it is you get your container of water, you bring it somewhere close to you, and you get your piece. You get your sanding block, and then you just get it wet, get your piece wet, and you can just start sanding. To make it even safer, you could take this to the sink, have the water run on it, and sand it. So switch to the point of view camera to show you how I recommend doing that. So if you're wet sanding, I would recommend turning the water on, have the water hit your piece at all times as you're sanding, and then you just apply pressure to the surface, and you sand until this feels nice and smooth. The reason why you want the water hitting it is because it traps the air and puts it down the drain. Just make sure if you're wet sanding, you do it in an area that has a trap underneath, because the powder can possibly clog your drain if you do a lot of wet sanding. One thing to remember, when you wet sand, if you sand the if you scratch the surface of your glaze with the sanding block, it will scratch. And the only way to fix that scratch, or at least the easiest way to fix that scratch, is you have to refire it. So keep that in mind as you sand. So that's wet sanding. All right, so that was wet sanding in the sink. And most people will have access to something like that, but it takes a little longer. You have to sand and apply more pressure. And I don't like having to do that when I can use machines and tools to help me out. So instead, I have the Giffin Grip, and I take the piece I need to sand, put it in the center, lock the arms in, and then spin the wheel, and then I'm ready to start sanding. And so this is my setup for the sanding. I have 2 containers, one with fresh water that I use to apply to the piece, and the second one, I put the sanding pads in it so that this collects the dust. You can see some settlement in the bottom. I was using this yesterday. And that will kind of just get more dusty as I sand more pieces. So the first thing that I do, I add a little bit of water onto the piece, and I take my first sanding block, the more rigid one, and I just apply downwards pressure to sand this to get it smooth. The more noise you hear, the rougher it is, and it should decrease in volume as it gets smoother. And I try to spin the wheel faster, so I let the wheel do the work. So dip it in a little water, and let's go. So in the audio, hopefully you heard that go from a lard rough sound to a more softer rough sound, because it did get softer and smoother as I sanded. Then I get my 2 sanding pads. I got 2 grits. I got a 60 grit and a 120 grit. 60 grit, 120 grit. And this is by Diamond Core Tools. Now, if you're watching Diamond Core Tools, I would love to work with you. I would love to help you guys out, even though you don't really need help, but these things are amazing. They work wonders. I've sanded over thousands of pieces with these, not these in particular, but they stand up to almost anything you throw at them. So anyway, Diamond Core Tools, if you're watching, I would love to work with you, but I swear by these to sand. And so the first thing that I do is I just take the 60 grit first, and I sand the top again. You heard the noise get a little softer. I was applying the same amount of pressure. Then I switch to the 120 grip. And I feels pretty buttery smooth. I then angle it to hit the corner. Angle it to hit the other corner. And then finally get the sponge here to absorb all the water. Feel it smooth and pop it off. All right? So nice and smooth. No roughness. It's not going to scratch any surface that it goes on. Okay, so that's sanding a piece that has only the foot exposed. Now, if you have a piece like this, like the majority of my glaze pieces where the entire foot's naked, this is the way that I like doing it. So similar steps, lock it in, spin the wheel, add some water, start off with the sanding block, apply heavy pressure. So try to listen for the audio to see if the pressure change or the noise changes. Did you hear the difference? I was applying the same amount of pressure and it got a little lighter. Okay, next up is the 60 and the 120 at the same time. And so what I like doing is I like sanding the inside and then the outside. So I take the 60 grit, the rougher one, push it up against the edge, and I push down on the top with the 120. This downwards force and the sideways force is just to ensure that this piece doesn't shift. And I'm trying to focus the pressure here to sand the inside of the outside of the foot. Okay, then I repeat that and I flip it, use this on the inside, this down on the top again, focusing the pressure on the corner. Okay, and then I dip it in the dirty water. Now I start sanding this area, using the corner as my main, go all the way to the edge, listen to the difference in the sanding sounds, and then I switch to the 120 grit. This time I wrap it over this edge so I can hit the corners, get that super smooth. And then I go back and do the same thing as I did the 60 grit. Now, if you want to go above and beyond, you can then do the same thing on the edges, inside and out, but you don't necessarily need to do that. Now, as it spins, you can just put your finger on and feel, but if it's rough and you do that, and you continuously do that, you will grind off layers of skin from your finger, and you won't really know it until like after you finish, and your finger's gonna feel super sore. So, safer way to do it, stop the wheel, feel it with your fingers, and if it feels good, then you can get your sponge that's in the dusty water, soak up all the water, and then pop it off. All right, so that's how I recommend sanding. Now let's do the last one. Flat bottom, no foot. So this one, same steps, just slightly more delicate. Start with the sanding block, making sure I only sand the bottom. So I'm just pushing down. Wait till the sound changes to get a little lighter, right there. Then I switch to the 60 grit. And one thing, if you have sensitive hearing, I do recommend wearing some earplugs or earbuds and listen to some music or something, because this can cause some ear irritation, because it is pretty loud, honestly. And if you're doing it in a studio with a lot of people, just be mindful. Let them know you're going to sand, because this does hurt my ears after doing like 10 plus pieces. All right, this outer edge. I got to be very careful not to sand the actual glaze. So focusing, just like I'm trimming, I'm just kind of lighter pressure, but still focusing it on that corner of the sanding block, and then switching to the 120 and repeating the same steps. Now, if you want to go even more sanding crazy, you can get other grits. The higher the grit, the smoother the sanding pad. You can go all the way to the 1000, and this, if you sand it enough, can feel like glass, and it can be so smooth. If it's porcelain, it can actually reflect light, which is pretty crazy, but that's a lot of work. And honestly, I think 120 is more than enough, because this feels pretty darn smooth in comparison. All right, so now the true test. I'm gonna get two pieces, one that wasn't sanded, one that is sanded. I'm gonna scratch it with an object so you can hear the difference in smoothness. I got two pieces here. This was the sanded, this is the not. Let's see if you can hear the difference as I drag the brush across. I'll get even closer so you get the audio, the mic closer. Same pressure. One you hear more skipping, other one's a lot more smooth. So I look crazy right now, but it definitely makes a huge difference. When you look at it up against the screen, you can actually see the difference. One looks a little more coarse and rough, the other one looks more smooth. And here's a sneak preview of a video that I plan to do in a little while. And if you don't know what this is a matcha bowl, and I've been getting really into drinking matcha in the morning, so hopefully you're excited for this, because I am. All right, anyway, let's clear this area and let's wrap this video up. So these pieces are sanded, they're smooth, they're ready to take home. I just gotta wash them and I can drink my favorite beverage out of them. And that beverage probably would be made in this matcha bowl, and then I'll just pour it in and drink some matcha. So stay tuned for the matcha bowl video coming soon. But anyway, these pieces are done, they're smooth, they're ready to take home. So hopefully you learned something new about loading the kiln and sanding pieces, and hopefully some safety things that you can use moving forward. And I can and probably will do more glazing videos, maybe talk about brushing, maybe talk about different overlaps, different styles, more pouring action. But there's so much to cover when it comes to glazing. Like, that's an art all in itself. So we'll get there eventually. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this series. We are actually ending on part 3, which is this one. I don't think I have anything for part 4 yet. So I hope you learned something new, and I hope you can use what we discussed to improve your glazing, because I know glazing can be a love-hate relationship. I myself, I love creating and glazing. Depends on how the pieces turned out. When it turns out great, I love it. When it doesn't, I am so sad. And I'm sure you all have experienced glazing that wasn't the best. But anyway, enough of me rambling. I can keep talking. Let's wrap this up. If you like this kind of content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps to grow the channel. And I love talking to you guys and building this community. And I do have a lot of things in store for 2026, possibly a Patreon, possibly some other cool things, an online shop where I will actually sell some pieces. So if you are looking forward to that, let me know in the comments below what you would like to see. because I love to interact with all this community that we're building. But enough about that. I can keep rambling. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for supporting this channel. You guys mean the world to me, and I wouldn't be making these videos if it wasn't for you guys. So I hope you have a great holiday season, and I hope you have a great outlook for the next 2026 year, because I'm really excited. But until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.